Okay, so Lars Meyer gets prepared for his talk, which is the final talk in this morning's session.
Yeah.
We all know that he comes from the Max Planck Institute of Cognitive and Brain Sciences in Leipzig. And I mean, I don't read that long title, I just say the purpose of synchronicity, and you will explain us what that means. Okay, Lars.
I don't know whether I'm going to be talking about the purpose, but I thought this might maybe provoke some people in the room. So, all right, so in my talk, I want to share some of my kind of humble linguist's thoughts about what the actual purpose of what many people here call entrainment to speech or entrainment to things that are hidden in speech could actually achieve for us in terms of language comprehension. Because I always, as a linguist, I always was puzzled when I read many of your papers that most of the data that have been published so far, they basically show a temporal alignment between speech rhythms and internal brain rhythms, right? But the goal of all this is understanding what someone has said, right? It's decoding of a message. It's like understanding the symbolic content of it, right? And what's the purpose of all this kind of time locking, phase locking in terms of understanding something, right? So that's why it's called the purpose of synchronicity, neural oscillations. And I believe neural oscillations align actually neural excitability with linguistic and high-level linguistic informativeness. So, if you believe it or not, language comprehension requires syntactic phrasing, right? And that's kind of obvious from this old observation that long lists of random words totally overburden your verbal working memory. So a full list of random words, you would hit the roof of your working memory in no time, right? If you have a list such as soldier, tall, waiter, teacher, follows, and old, sad. I don't know how many people of you, I guess you remember them all, right? Okay, but I don't know how many people really remembered each and every single one of these words, and let alone its phonological gestalt, right? But if you have structure amongst these to be memorized items, this benefits your working memory, right? And you have a big benefit for remembering the very same words that comes from the syntactic structure, right? Tall soldier follows waiter and old sad teacher. That's an easy one, right? Same words, same number of syllables, but you can remember one, you cannot remember the other. So syntactic phrase structure is, to me, a very sophisticated chunking device. And from these examples, you can see that syntactic phrasing is necessary for language comprehension. Well, by now, there's already, I think, 3 studies out there now that have, I think, quite convincingly shown that delta band oscillations reflect the formation of syntactic phrase structure. And this is just an example study from our group where we compared a condition where phrases could actually be built. They were yesterday evening at the, so you have some structure there, it's little sentence fragments. To a condition where you couldn't build up phrases, right? They, the, at, evening, yesterday, where. And we just compare these 2 conditions in a very simple analysis, sentence fragments, random word lists to be encoded. We see from the bars here that delta band power, and that's what we looked at here, increases for the sentence fragments in particular. And this is visual stimulation. On the left side, this is just all conditions against rest. And this might relate to a discussion we had yesterday already. This effect was task unspecific. So we compared orthogonally a factor where we had either a working memory task, so you were to kind of answer something about the sequence of words after a retention interval, or you just had a lexical decision task downstream, and so you wouldn't have to remember these words, right? And the effect came out for both tasks. So it seems to be automatic. Yeah, it's at least a little indication that this is automatic, right? Now, syntactic phrasing, or the syntactic phrasing that a listener is supposed to entertain, is only very weakly indexed in the stimulus, right? So, take a sentence such as this one. The client sued the murderer with a corrupt lawyer. Whose lawyer is this, right? It's unclear. Yeah? The sentence has two possible syntactic structures hidden underneath, and there's no cue in the input really that tells you which of the two structures you're supposed to take. Well, there's these little prosodic cues, right? You could speak the sentence with a single phrase intonation. The client sued the murderer with the corrupt lawyer. Now the murderer has the lawyer. Or you could speak it with the two phrases intonation. The client sued the murderer with the corrupt lawyer. And now the client has the lawyer. Okay, so in principle, there are these little speech prosodic cues, and they're used in language acquisition. That's what the toddlers first hear, because they're in the very slow frequency part of the speech signal, speech prosody. But when we actually ask people, after presenting them 150 or so sentences of this type, who actually had the lawyer, and we present them the same sentence with both of these prosodic variants, we find that, well, they can clearly dissociate the two prosodic variants, bless you, of the sentence. And you can see this from the fact that there are more client responses to client prosody sentences. So the dashed red bar is higher than client responses to murderer prosody sentences, right? And that's the dashed blue bar, and that's significant. So if you code these two choices in signal detection theoretic terms, you basically get a D prime that is significantly above zero, right? So participants can dissociate the two prosodic variants. However, there's also a highly significant detection bias, right? And you can see this from the solid blue bar and the dashed red bar. There are more client responses to client prosody sentences than there are murderer responses to murderer prosody sentences, right? And so your bias kind of, behaviorally at least, appears to override what's indicated in the speech stream. Yeah? So you kind of ignore that kind of physical marking of the syntactic structure, right? So discriminability versus bias, tracking versus imposition, and we discussed this yesterday shortly. Participants have a linguistic phrasing bias, and that's true, I think, for all of these ambiguous sentence structures. That's one of the few cases where you can actually see this kind of bias, right? The stimulus is ambiguous, you could assign multiple structures, but participants always have a certain bias for resolving these, right? And they kind of ignore speech prosody in these cases. And so I think this is really something that shows that the formation of syntactic phrases is really a kind of generative, top-down process that you actively do, and you act upon speech. You don't take it from speech. So delta band oscillations, as we all have read, have been described to kind of track phrases in speech and to follow the phrase structure that is in speech. That's the Ding study, and that's also compatible with the Bonhager study that I just showed you. But does the delta band also support this, what I call the top-down imposition of phrases or syntactic structure upon the speech stream? And so to find out, we compared now trials where participants decided to continue a syntactic phrase in this ambiguous sentence at the offset of the murderer, to those trials where participants terminated the phrase. And this is now, as you have seen from the bar plot before, this is orthogonal to speech prosody, right? So this is a 2x2 design. And we're now looking at the main effect of decision and not of a pitch track or of prosody or anything. And what we see is that shortly before this syntactic phrase is over at the offset of the murderer, or it's continued for that matter if participants chose the other way around, we get a difference in the phase of the ongoing delta band oscillation. Right? So this is what you see here. There's also a main effect of prosody, of course, and people have described how speech prosody is tracked by maybe delta in the auditory regions, but this is not an auditory effect. It's orthogonal to the auditory effect. Yeah. And it's even happening before you actually end the phrase. So maybe you even know before what you're going to do at that point in time, right? Well, we have further evidence from these data that this is actually a top-down process. And this evidence shows that biased participants actually kind of stop listening. So this bar plot now shows the coherence between the bandpass filtered EEG, so the delta bandpass filtered EEG signal, and that part of the speech signal that really codes the phrase structure, right? The pitch track. That's where speech prosody sits. And that's what kind of marks the rough, very big, coarse constituent boundaries on the sentence level. And we calculate now a speech-brain coherence here for all the decisions that participants have been making. We find that this coherence between the pitch track and the brain signal actually drops whenever participants give a biased response. Right? So every time they follow their bias, the coherence with a pitch track goes down, and this is significant. And what we then did is that we calculated from the behavioral data the individual signal detection theoretic bias, so the criterion for each participant, and we correlated that with the main effect of coherence reduction, right? And so for the psycholinguists in the room, you can predict the individual attachment bias, so whether you're a high attacher or a low attacher. You can predict this basically from the drop in speech-brain coherence, right? So if you're a biased person, you don't listen. You don't care about what people say. You're just like, you know it already, and you're going to assign this syntactic phrase structure to the sentence you just heard, even if it might be wrong. Okay? So this is now, everything I've shown so far is in line with what Ding and colleagues have also proposed, that maybe one cycle, I know this is a toy model, but you know it's something we can work with, at least in this field, that one cycle of the delta band oscillation corresponds to one syntactic phrase. And I think it's internally generated, basically. So, but that's maybe not so important for the next point that I want to make, right? So if you have this oscillatory cycle being present, so a single cycle, and this sentence comes in, you're kind of forced to put all the words highlighted in blue into one long phrase, right? The client suit, the murder with the clipper, and so on. Okay, and if you have this pattern present of two cycles, a bit faster maybe, you kind of are forced to split up this stream of words in the middle and assign a syntactic phrase structure that has two phrases. It's really as simple as that. And that's kind of the data I think that has been published so far, this Ding study, and that's the things that I've presented so far here. And I kind of think it's quite credible already. Okay, so cool. We have an alignment between a brain oscillation and some structure. I mean, what do we do with it? Have you comprehended the sentence? No, we haven't understood anything, right? What does it bias? Is it just some nice parallelism and it's self-similarity and it's fractals? No, I don't think so. I was reading Peter Lakator's work and on the delta band, and many, of course, of you know this. The phase of the delta band oscillation seems to be related to the excitability of those neurons that actually generate this oscillation, right? So in one part of the oscillatory cycle, the generating neurons are kind of unexcitable, and that's where you're inattentive, that's where you're slow, that's where you're maybe not as accurate. Whereas in the second half of the cycle, the underlying neurons are excitable, and you're very attentive to an incoming stimulus. So now I thought, like, wait, if we have this alignment between the oscillatory cycle and the syntactic phrase, then this would entail that parts of the phrase that co-occur with the unexcitable phase segment of the oscillatory cycle are not really processed very well, whereas parts of the phrase that co-occur with the excitable phase segments, those should be the ones that you process very well, right? You get it for free, kind of. Once you have this alignment, you get the system in a state that it can differentially extract information from within a syntactic phrase. And so to test this, a hypothesis that the alignment between the delta band and the syntactic phrase leads to an implicit alignment of excitability and information within the phrase, we designed a paradigm with little morphosyntactic errors. So everything in red is a little morphosyntactic error. It's in most cases, it's actually an agreement match, so a mismatch. So an agreement mismatch basically means you have, say, a plural determiner at the onset of a phrase, and then you have a singular adjective or noun coming in, right? Just that's the simplified version of this manipulation, basically. And we have these violations now at 10 steps in the phrase, from the left to the right, okay? And participants are now to spot these errors. That's just their task, like spot the error, okay? And these violations, and that's, I think, the crucial point of this, and this is why I think this is related to information processing. These occur now at time points where the syntactic phrase internally differs in its informativeness in information-theoretic terms. Okay, so how do we quantify this? Syntactic informativeness is the degree of expectedness of a given abstract syntactic category at a given moment in time to follow another syntactic category. So in this case, after an article, after a determiner, after the, there will be a noun. Whatever noun it is, but there will be a noun. And you're pretty sure about this, right? If an adjective comes up, well, this is possible. The big cat, this is also fine. You know, it's fine with the syntactic phrase structure that you have acquired when you were a toddler. However, it's a little less expected. It's a little more surprising. You could play this on forever. You could integrate because the phrase structure is so flexible, right? You could introduce an adverb, the very big cat, and this is even more surprising. Yeah, so that's the information content that is in the syntactic structure. It's got nothing to do with the lexicon. It's got nothing to do with semantics. It's purely based on the syntactic category, but they are informative. So what we can do is we take a computational parsing model, a probabilistic context-free grammar, basically, and we train it on a so-called tree bank. A tree bank is a database of a large number of sentences. In this case, it's 60,000 annotated sentences, and they have little tree structures. Some student assistant has drawn 60,000 tree structures for these sentences. Yeah? And based on these tree structures, you can calculate the surprises, or the information content, of the syntactic category at every single moment in every single one of these 60,000 sentences. Once you've trained this computational parser, you can just take your list of stimuli, run it through the parser, and it will tell you, for your stimuli, which word is how high in syntactic information content. Okay? So now we basically know, for each of our 10 violations, how informative the syntactic phrase was at every single one of these 10 points in the phrase. So first, we're, of course, proposing for the behavior, because that's what people have found before, an optimal detection performance in unsurprising context. Right? That's in line with much of the probabilistic parsing literature. Then we, of course, also were hypothesizing to replicate the published data on the alignment between the delta band cycle and the syntactic phrase. Right? We should show this, otherwise this is all maybe rubbish. And then it becomes interesting, because I think violation detection should be predicted by the phase gradient that is resulting from the alignment between the delta band oscillation and the syntactic phrase. And this would kind of point to the idea that the delta syntax alignment results in an implicit alignment of neural excitability to predicted or uninformative syntactic information. Okay, let's look at the behavioral data first. Increasing predictability, roughly increasing predictability of the syntactic category across the syntactic phrase. That's what we already saw in the stimulus description. On the z-axis, you have the information content, basically, at each of these 10 time points. On the x-axis, you have time, and on the y-axis, you have reaction time, right? And you can see that reaction time kind of nicely decreases towards the right edge of the phrase, and that's also the side of the phrase to where the syntactic information content is decreasing. So behaviorally, this appears to work, okay? Morphosyntactic violations in highly predictive contexts, so violations that are informative because you didn't expect them, are easily detected. Check. This is significant still when we correct for the time point of violation occurrence, right, which could have been a problem resulting from the experimental paradigm that we were using. And this is generally in line with probabilistic psycholinguistic models that derive processing demands from syntactic predictability. So, okay, good to have. Behavioral paradigm seems to work. Now, second hypothesis. In the topography, basically, this is the topography of the phase concentration parameter of the bandpass filtered signal average across the 10 violation time points. And what you can see is that the concentration of phase across participants in the delta band is highly significant here across the whole syntactic phrase, and it's there in every single one of those 10 bins that we saw, right? And this could be taken as evidence that there was kind of an alignment between the syntactic phrases and the oscillatory cycle. Yeah? Okay, so this is just a replication so far. What you can see from the rows plots below, yeah, so every one of these 10 data points is a subject, and you can see that within each of the 10 violation positions, you see the high concentration, but you can also see that the phase angle slowly shifts across the phrase, right? And that's what we wanted, kind of. It gets more apparent even from this graphic, where I'm plotting basically all trials of all participants sorted by their oscillatory phase. Yeah. Bandpass filtered delta, yeah, thanks. It's 0.5 to 4 hertz, I think. Yeah, just a coarse bandpass thing. Thanks for asking. Yeah. So, and this is now all trials of all participants sorted by their oscillatory phase. Okay, and on the left, what you see is the mode of the violation position from 1 to 10. And on the right side, you see, this is complex, you see on the z-axis the syntactic information content, and you see on the y-axis the behavior, the reaction time. And this is now sorted by phase, right? So what you can see is that late violation positions in the phrase, they associate with phase segments between -pi and 0, very consistently. And that's also the part of the phrase where you're fast in responding, and that's where the information content is low. At the onset of the phrase, you predominantly find phase segments between 0 and pi. And from the right plot, you can see that this is the point of the phrase where the information content is very high, and that's where you're also very slow. Right? So I think this is already quite nice because we can show that somehow the informativeness kind of maps onto the oscillatory cycle. But what does this have to do with neural excitability? Well, and I didn't plan this immediately, but I thought, wait, I have a morphosyntactic violation. I can do an ERP analysis on it, right? Because we know that morphosyntactic violations, they're accompanied by an early negativity in the ERP, which is called the LAN, the left anterior negativity. And I thought that, and which might be generated by regions or aspects of the temporal lobe, and might be related to kind of low-level detection of kind of high-level errors, if you so will. Yeah? So I thought that if this is related to neural excitability, I should see a difference in the amplitude of this ERP to the morphosyntactic violation in the course of the syntactic phrase as well, right? And so here again, I sorted the amplitude of the LAN. This is the topography. Don't look at the red blob. Only look at the negativity over the left anterior sensors, please, just for the matter of the argument. Yeah. And I took the amplitude in this time window between 300 and 500 milliseconds, and again sorted all trials by their phase. And you can see easily that the amplitude of the left anterior negativity now increases across the syntactic phrase, such that late violations in the phrase that are not particularly informative and where the response is fast, this is accompanied by a large LAN response. And early parts of the phrase, where the phrase is very informative and your processing is slow, there you get a small LAN. And now this gradient is correlated with the oscillatory phase of the delta frequency oscillation 300 milliseconds before. So oscillatory phase during the occurrence of a syntactic violation predicts your electrophysiological detection of the violation 300 milliseconds downstream. So I think this now allows for the claim that delta band phase alignment between syntactic phrases and the oscillatory cycle might be actually a proxy to steer neural excitability to high-level linguistic information content that is kind of hidden in the abstract structure underlying the phrase, and that you have projected from the top down. Okay. My conclusions. Delta band oscillations appear to subserve the top-down imposition of syntactic phrases upon the speech stream, and this even reduces the reliance on bottom-up acoustic or prosodic cues. When oscillatory cycles and syntactic phrases align, your neural excitability is implicitly aligned with high-level linguistic informativeness, and this in turn facilitates the lower-level electrophysiological processing and behavioral processing of genuine syntactic information. Okay? So I'm claiming that the purpose of synchronicity between delta band cycles and syntactic structure is the alignment of neural excitability with syntactic, so high-level linguistic information within syntactic phrases. So kind of the goal of language comprehension, if you so will. So thanks to my mentor, Angela Federici, for letting me do this work. Thanks to my colleagues in Frankfurt, Osnabrück, and Ontario, and thanks to my students, especially Matthias Gumbert, who I think hates me a lot because he had to do all these violations and had to design this paradigm in a master's thesis. So he had a tough labor there. And thanks to Phoebe in Maryland and Nora in Mannheim, and thanks for your attention.
So, thank you very much, Lars. Jonas has a question.
Thanks very much for this. I wondered whether you could tell us a bit more about... okay, so no, I put it differently. So what I had in my head when I see these data is that what you are doing is violation detection, right? Is that correct? Like for this main study that you showed in the end. So, and I think you mentioned it in passing that there's a temporal hazard, of course. So I'm in your experiment and I'm detecting this little thing. I mean, it's a super smart sort of setup, but it's on the other hand, like I cannot kind of not look at these data and think like, in how far can I account for, well, for the sake of controversy, all of it by saying it's temporal hazard or a prediction. And so I would like just to hear your point on this and see how you actually also kind of dealt with this statistically, so you can.
In the first place, I didn't, and so it got rejected. Of course. And in the second step, I looked at the distribution of the information content again, right? And it's not strictly speaking a linear relationship between time point and information content. Yeah. So I can basically take the time points of the violation occurrence and calculate the residual of the reaction times, and that's still correlated with the information content. So the correlation gets weaker, so there is something about the paradigm, and I totally agree on this. And I haven't really thought about that when I designed the experiment. It's really a flaw of the thing. But the correlation still holds, even if we calculate the residual from the time point of violation occurrence.
A very brief, am I allowed a brief follow-up? Just the other thing that I love and that confuses me at the same time is this delta, the little rose plots you're showing. Yeah. So I'm trying to, that's good that Odette asked also, so we know it's about a 1 Hertz oscillation, but like shouldn't this guy like move around the cycle in this time?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, very weird. Very weird. I mean, in the totally. It puzzles me. Yeah, totally. I was expecting full cycle. Didn't come up. So I mean, in Ding's study, they find like the sentence level thing as well, you know, and they find the faster frequency phrase level things. Maybe a different bandpass filter. It's really it puzzled me as well. It's still so the difference in phase angle between the bins is still significant, right? It comes out in the F test and comes out in most of the T tests. So. It's fine. Yeah, I'm puzzled. So my take on it is, well, I mean, maybe what delta does is not really related to the fine-grained phrase structure, but it's just related to the major constituent boundaries. And this would rather predict something that is very sluggish on the sentence level. Yeah. I was discussing this with Peter Hachot a couple of weeks ago and with many people last night. And he suggested that maybe the way that I'm modeling information content here is not really, you know, I'm doing this on syntactic terms because I read the Ding study and I did this study on syntax before, so I think we should get started with looking at syntactic informativeness because that's the data we have and that's what we can form the new hypothesis from. But there are many different other ways to quantify linguistic informativeness. You could quantify lexical, you could n-gram, calculate the n-gram. You could also look at information structure. Where's the important information on the sentence level, right? Linguists call this information structure. There's always something, like one important entity in the sentence. Jonas was yesterday talking about pianos, and then it all became wild, right? And everyone was like, okay, this is about pianos. And so maybe the alignment that I have to search for is really somewhere else, on some different layer on the information-theoretic modeling, basically. So, yeah, like I say, I just did it based on the prior evidence, but it could be that actually there's an alignment to something slower frequency that happens on a slower frequency scale on the sentence level. Yeah.
Well, in that line, I want to say something that stems from the observation that I had, questions that came up in the theta domain. I mean, what is the role of oscillation in a single word recognition? You just throw one word, what time do you have for the theta to get into the picture? And
do words exist?
No, but it's, oscillation needs some time to develop.
Yeah.
And the question here is, why wouldn't you use some carrier in the delta range before you enter into your phrase to see if indeed it is related to delta? You see what I'm saying? I mean, you just run with one sentence that is maybe a delta long cycle, I'm suggesting a stimulus preparing, and training a delta, and then let your sentence coming and check that phase.
We're doing this right now, actually. So we're trying to induce basically a delta rhythm with neurostimulation, and then fool people with phrases that match the rhythm or not, right? And see whether we get some tiny little reaction time difference and they're being fooled or something. You could consider a similar thing when you think about turn taking, right? Because people are very precise in turn taking. They have time window of I think it's below 100 milliseconds or so, right? They're super fast in reacting and taking turns, right? So they kind of predict the end of the phrase of the other speaker, right? And what happens if I take a speaker who has a very regular phrase rhythm and he always makes these weird 10-syllable long phrases, and I'm expecting to take my turn now, and all of a sudden he's giving me a 15-syllable phrase, right? And I will definitely interrupt him or something. So that's a similar way of looking at that, yeah.
Okay, Andrea?
So I know we've discussed this before, but I have to ask again. So why do you say chunking and not forming a proposition or composing something?
Good question. What would you call it?
Composition.
Composition.
I would say, that you're detecting units that you're going to...
I don't know whether that's composition, because no one has shown that it is composition. Right?
Well, I think there's a lot of formal evidence that we
No,
need
on the neural level, showing that there's actually, compositionality happening when I have 5 words and they form a phrase, that I get a compositional new representation. No one has shown this.
That's the other point, though, is that there's lots of other structure in there that you're ignoring.
Okay, this you mean.
I don't know why it's just at that marker where you decided the delta phase starts, right? Why not? What about the verb before, where there's lots of information about structure and phrases?
That's theoretical assumptions, right? So it's depending on whether you need use a left corner parser or whatever you assume.
What I think about informativeness.
So I think as far as I know, the parser that I use, that's the ROC parser, and that's based on a left corner top-down thing, right? So the information content is, of course, kind of biased by that procedure. In that respect, you're right.
I was wondering where you have thought of using something like Jabberwocky to get rid of the semantics in your stimuli. And just get because you're trying to make a claim exclusively about syntax, right?
Yes.
So wouldn't it have been nicer to use stimuli that were mostly driven by syntactic?
Sure. Yeah, you're right in a way. I just always think that Jabberwocky is such a weird thing, and I don't know what people do when they
because
hear
of that, right? I mean,
you just buy in as many new processes as you just got rid of. So that's just always my feeling. So, but in principle, that's a good idea. Yeah, I think so, because you could calculate the information content just as well. It would be interesting whether you could actually do it, I think, from computational terms, because of course, the parser that you want to run over your stimuli, it needs to know the lexicon. And if you bombard it with words that it hasn't seen, it will just maybe present an error message or something because it doesn't know these words. I wonder whether the parser could actually, Andrea could tell me, whether the parser would actually just work on inflectional morphology, but I doubt it. No. So in principle, you would first need a Jabberwocky corpus.
I think it should work. on Jabberwocky.
Yeah, but you need a Jabberwocky corpus to train it on. You need like 60,000 Jabberwocky sentences, train the parser, and then you can tag 15 new Jabberwocky sentences. Yeah, otherwise, I think it wouldn't fly.
Okay, I have now, a couple of more, questions, and I just list you. So it's Marcel, Nina, Annelies, and then David, and I think we should close it after that, and then just now see, what the new questions are. So Marcel.
Yeah, so thank you very much for this really very exciting stuff. I've never thought about delta in relation to language comprehension, so that's really cool to see.
Now you have to.
I mean, this obviously begs the question: how would that relate to the things that I've been observing, especially in the beta range, right? I mean, if beta is something that tracks sentences and delta is something that tracks phrases, did you have the occasion to look at cross-frequency coupling between the two, or or other kinds of interrelationships? Because that would be the obvious next step, then, right?
Yes. You would. Yeah, if you take it in terms of predictions, then maybe the delta phase alignment and trains kind of some like faster oscillation underneath that kind of does something. I think the reason for it is really it's a top-down thing in my head. Yeah. So the Ding study and my previous attachment ambiguous study, they are all designed in terms of syntax kind of. And so I'm looking at the syntactic information content, right? And for beta, I don't have unlike you, I don't have a hypothesis that it relates to syntax at all. Like for me, it's something that relates to the N4, and that's relating to kind of the n-gram and contextual predictions that are purely non-syntactic. So, but that's not a strong epistemological reason, right? So in principle, yeah, I should look at it. I mean, when you consider this whole theory that the slowest frequency oscillation should maybe be the pacemaker in the cortex and dictate maybe the rhythm of all the faster frequencies, then it should definitely be there. Yeah, I mean, you see it in speech perception that the delta kind of entrains the theta band and maybe trickling down to the gamma. Yeah, and Joachim Gross has published this brilliant study on how the delta from the prefrontal cortex kind of aligns the labor in the auditory cortex. Peter Lakatosh work. So yes, in principle, it's just that I don't have strong hypotheses there.
I'm not in line. May I answer that?
No.
Okay. It's a short
I'll try.
comment. It's not only the slowest ones that can produce the higher frequency ones. Sometimes the higher frequency ones can act as a kind of reverse phase amplitude coupling and determine the lower ones. And I suspect that happens sometimes in speech and maybe in at least parts of those delta.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I just wonder whether you can bring back the slide where you had 1 versus 2 cycles for the...
the toy model, yeah.
And so I wonder whether you can help me. So where I'm struggling is like, I look at this and I'm like, that's great, and I can totally see this if we're talking about representational kind of offline case. But if I now have to bring the real time in, which I think, and you're basically trying to say that, if I understand you correctly, you're saying that delta is a chunking mechanism for constituent items, the same way that, say, theta is a chunking mechanism for syllable items. So if I have to do this for chunking constituents in real time, and imagine I'm the blue line, right? And I've decided that this is going to be my constituent. So what do I do in the case, when I get to the murderer and then the next word actually must be a constituent? So the client sued the murderer yesterday, So, do you see what...
But the murderer yesterday?
So yesterday is not part...
That's the song, He's My Yesterday Man or something, right? So you can be a yesterday murderer, I think. But anyway.
The client sued the murderer and, ran away. So
you mean on syntactic terms it has to be a constituent, but you cannot help? But I would guess there's an error then. Yeah, you run into your own trap.
So but surely I can process those sentences. So what I'm trying to ask is I can understand the story if it's about delta resetting of the phase, right? But if it's about kind of using this ongoing oscillation and fitting in everything that you have into the ongoing oscillation, that's where I kind of crash.
Yeah, I mean, if this is true, it would mean that phrases and sentences that are actually produced are much more regular than we think, right? So maybe at the beginning you establish a rhythm of 2 or 3 phases that all have phrases that all have the same length, and then the remainder is the same way. But I haven't seen any publication that has really done a systematic analysis of this on the utterance level. So, yeah, this is actually the claim that I'm making. Yeah. There's some evidence from boundary perception, though, where you know that the relative length of the IPBs, like your perception of an IPB depends on the length of the IPBs before and of the magnitude of the IPBs before. So there seems to be something there. You never perceive an IPB independently. You perceive it in terms of its relation to the other IPBs.
Just a quick note, you're also, I guess, sensitive to the word duration, right? So like a man with a cat is different for your story from like an astronaut with a caterpillar, just because an astronaut with a caterpillar takes longer and therefore...
Yeah, but I don't know from quantitative analysis of speech corpora whether this is actually taking longer. Maybe people speed up. Maybe people even introduce additional syllables like just to keep this rhythm, right? That's actually what I'm thinking. Or they make a little pause just to make it fit.
Thanks for the talk. I'm going to ask a very naive question. So if delta has to do with syntax, what do you think would sort of reset the delta when there is no violation, like in normal speech? What is the anchor point for you?
Your internal knowledge.
Syntactically.
Your internal knowledge is the anchor point. You project the structure.
Sorry?
Your internal knowledge is the anchor point.
No, but I mean, so one cycle, one phrase. Mm-hmm. What in the phrase is what is going to drive the phase of your delta?
Nothing.
Or is it the other way around?
Nothing. Your internal knowledge does it. In this case, it's probabilistic. I mean, like we discussed yesterday in the Ding study, there's nothing in the stimulus that indicates this. There's an international phrase boundary and people ignore it.
Not in the stimulus, but syntactically.
I guess it's quantitative, like based on language acquisition. Yeah. I mean, no one knows how this bias, in this particular ambiguity, what the reason is for this bias. Whether this is a working memory limitation that phrases have to have a certain length, or whether this is like a lower or upper limit to the delta band frequency. What the exact limiter is, I don't know. I mean, I'm claiming it's the wavelength of the delta band. Yeah. But it could as well be that this is more variable than we think. Yeah. All I'm saying is that this is something internal and related to the wavelength of the oscillation. Yeah. How that translates to linguistic terms and grammatical concepts, I'm not really sure. Yeah.
Okay, David.
Yeah, I'm finding myself a little frustrated because I'm extremely sympathetic to what you're trying to do. I like the direction. I like the spirit of the proposal. But there are 3 things, like serious things, missing for me. And the first is what's been come up briefly now, which is we really actually do need some statistical characterization cross-linguistically of phrase lengths of different types. And so, here's an idea. They're going to be between 1 and 3 seconds on the mean or something like that. If that's true, then there's a game in town, right? So then there's actually information that can be used, and then this sort of delta cyclicity will be informative in a deep sense. For the things about the particular study that make me a little, it goes back to Jonas's question. So if we, for instance, if you can briefly show your behavioral data, I simply don't need to see. That's basically for me captured in
that's hazard rate. Yeah.
That's the hazard rate.
So that's the unresidualized reaction time. That's the raw reaction time. Yeah. So the residual looks more like the surprise.
So do you really get cyclicity in the raw reaction time?
Do I get what?
So both here and in the Rose plots, I guess I'm failing to appreciate the true cyclicity that you would need to be true for this to be right. So and that leaves me a little unsatisfied because I want you to be right, but both the behavior and the physiology leave me unsatisfied.
It doesn't fit this.
It doesn't fit the elegance of the model is not matched by the data, and so that's a problem here.
I agree. I agree. Yeah. But I always have to say, in the Ding study, the alignment was forced, right? And we don't know whether for natural speech you really have it, or whether the alignment is to some other periodicity that is maybe in information theory, theme, reme, topic, focus, something like that. So, I mean, yeah, if this would be a field where people work totally data-driven, then now we would have to say, okay, no, there's no alignment between oscillatory phase and syntactic cycles, right?
Well, I think at this point we should close and sort of thank again Lars first.
Thank you.